So Josh and I have gotten to know each other for a little while, and Josh has been interviewing with the directors here for a while. And listen, there were millions of candidates, and we chose the best one. So we're so excited, Josh, to have you and Courtney here. The first thing I would love for you to do, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself and your incredible wife and talk about your kids and all that kind of family stuff. I'm sure everybody would love to know that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Courtney and I are so excited and just thrilled to be here and joining you as a family. I think about what the Apostle Paul said to the Ephesians. He said, ever since the first time I heard of you and of your faith, I haven't stopped thinking of you, praying for you, and that is precisely how I feel. I remember the very first moment, and you all have been in our thoughts and in our prayers for quite some time, even though you didn't even know it. And so, that said, yes, I'm Josh. This is my wife, Courtney, down here in the front. We didn't know that she would be able to, we didn't know that she'd be able to come today until pretty recently. So I was excited that she could join today. And then we also have 3 kids. They are ages 3, 6, and 9. All girls, so I'm outnumbered quite a bit at home. Lots of estrogen in our house. And I have to clean that shower drain a lot because of all the hair. And so I'll tell you about each one for a minute here. So we have Tessa is the oldest. She is the dramatic one in the house. Let's just say that. She's full of life, full of energy, and you can't miss her. So that will, when they come soon, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And then you have Julia in the middle, and she is full of joy, kind of just goes with the flow. Maybe you might say that sounds like a middle child, and that makes sense. Sweet girl. And then our youngest is Lucy, so she's 3 and just starting to figure out what her whole personality is. But yeah, we live in Suwanee, Georgia right now. Our house just went under contract, so we're making progress to moving here to Naples, and we already have our rental home here in Naples for a while. Thank you, Michael and Dana, for getting us hooked up with that. And so we are on our way down here to Naples, but right now we're in Suwanee, Georgia, and yeah.
Home of the Falcons training camp. Suwanee, Georgia.
That's right,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for helping them be so successful this year. So I'm an Atlanta guy, I'm a Falcons guy, so it's miserable. All right, so I just really quick before I ask you another question. I love that you said that since the moment you heard that you have been praying and thinking about this church. You know, I think the directors would all say this too. The first thing we did when we started even thinking about how to source a new candidate and figure out what the job description would be, and so the search team and then the directors did this, we began praying for the person that God was preparing, not knowing who that person is, right? If you have children, you've done this, right? You pray for the future spouse for your kids before you even know who they are or anything about them, right? And so it's cool when we see those things kind of come together. And so we've been doing that on your behalf too, and you and Courtney, so that's neat. I'm going to ask a question I ask of everybody just for my own benefit, so I hope you can tolerate this. But I love hearing about people's love story. So can you tell us just how you and Courtney met? Like, what was that like? When did you meet? What was the first date like? If you have a good proposal story, you can tell it. If you bombed it, don't worry, you don't have to share it. So how did you guys meet? Like, what's your love story?
Pretty good proposal, I have to
say. Okay, well, then you should share it then. Yeah.
Just saying. We met, it's a little bit unique, at least we think it's unique. We met visiting the college that we would eventually go to. So you know how they do those like college for a weekend visit opportunities? You think you want to go to the school, so you go and hang out there for a weekend and just get to see what it's like. We both happened to be at the same college visit thing on the same weekend, 2 years before we would go to college. So we met there, and it was love at first sight. Not really.
Obviously, yeah.
It was one way, and I'm not going to say what way it was. And then we exchanged numbers at that time, and back in those days, I had to buy a what did they calling card? You guys remember those? I bought a calling card, and she was living in Alabama, and I was living in Massachusetts. So her dad basically said, "You can't talk and use up my minutes." So I bought a card, and we started talking and writing to each other quite a bit. For 2 years, we got to just become friends from afar. And then once we got to college is when we started dating. So fast forward to when I proposed, because this is good, man. Well, you can be the judge of that.
You've built this up, so...
Yeah, I should not have done that. I'm regretting that now.
Yes.
But by that point, I had become pretty close with her dad, and so I arranged it with him in advance that during a college break, he paid for a flight for her to come from college back home to Birmingham, Alabama, but he paid for a flight that had 3 layovers. Poor girl, I felt so bad. And I bought a flight that was a straight shot. And so I was able to make it to her final destination before she got there. And when she was walking toward the exit, when she landed, I was there in the airport with my guitar playing a song that I had written to her to propose to her. So, and thankfully she said yes. She was a little thrown off, and it got a little weird because I was on my knee.
Because TSA was...
Yeah, they were giving me a lot of strange looks. And then when I knelt down to propose to her, she knelt down with me, which was a little bit unexpected. But she says she just was a little thrown off by the whole thing. She was in sweatpants.
She's like, can everybody stop looking at me if I kneel down? Can I get out of... How quick can I get out of this moment? Yep.
Exactly.
All
so
right.
Maybe it wasn't that good of a proposal.
Yeah.
Now that we
good.
talk about it.
Well, I didn't tell you we were going to do this, but Rob said you could use his guitar. And,
okay.
No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. Re-sing the song. Okay. So you're a pastor. You've been one before. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'd love for you, too, just to share a little bit about your faith story, like your faith journey. When did you place your faith in Jesus? And kind of how has that, journey been for you?
Yeah. So like many, I grew up in a home where my parents were believers in Jesus, and they taught me all about God. And so for most of my life, I basically just had the assumption that God was real, but really hadn't made that faith truly my own until later. Although I started to see signs of what God was doing in my life pretty early, I think I was probably around 10 when I started to see, I think I want to be a pastor. I didn't understand what that meant or why, but I remember even looking at the guy preaching, and I would say, I want to be like that. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I just kind of kept it in my heart. And so as I became a teenager, that's when I wanted to make that faith my own. And there was an experience where we were in a really small church at the time. Maybe, anyways, it was very small, and they kind of had an opportunity for people who wanted to know more and more about faith. And so I took a little class and decided to put my faith in Jesus as probably my first time making that decision myself. And I have to say, everything really changed from there. Jesus became and still is my everything, my hope, my all, my strength, my foundation. I kind of wondered at the time, is this kind of just an emotional fad or something that I'm experiencing? But one of the things that has stuck with me is that it wasn't that. Here we are all these years later, and he becomes every day more my passion. ministry is awesome, but it's not my passion. Jesus is my passion, and come to fall more in love with him all the time. And so that's kind of the overview of my story there, and we can talk about ministry and college studies and so forth, but that's kind of where my heart is.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, Josh, I haven't known you for that long, but we've spent a lot of hours on phone calls and Zooms and all that. I think that's one of the things that I'm sure you sense this in him. I think when there's a lot of people who say they follow Jesus, right? It's one thing to follow, it's another thing to fully live fully alive in that followership, right? And I think that's one thing about you that's so attractive, is that even just talking to you, you sense that that's real. It's not just words, right? And as a pastor, that's so critical. If you've ever worked at a church, you would agree, I think, but I think working at a church is the worst thing you can do for your spiritual life, because God becomes work, and it's weird, you know? So to see that in you, I think, is just so wonderful. And I know it's, wonderful for the church. So let's talk about ministry for a minute then. So, you're 10, you see the guy on stage and you think, that looks fun. And you had no idea how not fun that was, but you thought it would look good. So you go to college, you get out, so how did this ministry journey begin?
Yeah. So as college drew near, I realized I needed to be making some decisions about my life, and as I thought long and hard about it, I realized that as a vocation, that is the perfect match for who I am, and I don't think anything else would be a match. And so I just made the leap to go to Bible college, got a degree in pastoral ministries there, and then got hired as a assistant pastor at a church in Plymouth, Massachusetts. This also happens to be where I grew up. It was a very young church, young as in relatively new at the time. And so there was a senior pastor, and then I was there as the assistant pastor. And we ended up growing to more staff over time, but at the time it was essentially just us in that pastoral role. And so we were sharing a lot of the pastoral ministry, from some preaching, teaching, strategizing on children's ministry, youth ministry, and more. Weddings, baptisms, funerals, and washing the floors and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And that became an opportunity for me to learn a lot. The pastor there gave me a lot of opportunity to fail, and that's what I did a lot. But he was there to kind of teach me on how to improve in the future. And we also just saw God move powerfully. We were in an interesting area in downtown Plymouth, and in some ways we saw a lot of people kind of coming off the streets into church on Sundays, sometimes after a long Saturday night, if you know what I mean. And I don't know. What do you mean? Okay. I was kidding. Keep going. And so we saw people's lives transformed by Jesus. And not only that, but addictions were broken. Spiritually, people were coming to life in Christ. Mm-hmm. And we also saw some numerical growth as well. And it was just an exciting time to watch God move. And that's kind of... that experience shaped me so much into who I am today and how I view ministry. What was your favorite part of that church job? What did you just love the most about it? Yeah, one thing I really loved was, I kind of just alluded to it a second ago, is I really do mean it. We had some serious transformations in people's lives, and being able to watch that, experience that, and witness that was huge for me. Did you guys ever see the cardboard testimonies? Do you remember this thing? This was kind of a popular thing years ago, where people, you put some music to it and people walk up to the stage, and one side of the piece of cardboard they're holding says a few words that describe who they used to be. And then they flip the cardboard around, and there's new words that describe who they are now as a result of Jesus. And I remember we used to do that for a few years in a row. And I think back to that because what I loved about the job, and I can talk about like what I was doing, but the results of it really got to my heart, that this is what it's all about. People's lives are being transformed. We're reaching this community in the name of Jesus. And yeah, that's probably the thing that sticks with me the most.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it is amazing, right? When you work at a church, you get a front row seat for a lot of that. At the same time, I know none of you have ever thought this, but you look at a pastor and you're like, well, you work one day a week. How hard can this be, right? And you're not even preaching every week, so how hard can it be, right? But the reality is, especially in a smaller church, like you mentioned, you kind of jokingly said it, but you're right. You're the president and the janitor. I mean, you're washing floors and cleaning, and I've spent a lot of time in portable churches where the bathrooms are disgusting every morning when you walk in on Sunday morning, and you're scrubbing toilets and all that. I mean, even this morning is a great example. The toilets were clean, but like this morning we showed up here at 7:30. And the building was locked, and it's usually not. And so they're usually able to get in a lot earlier and begin setup. And so at 7:30, we got here we were on time for our deal, but the building was still locked. And we had all of our gear just sitting outside, And so it's like, well, here we go, This is what being a pastor in a church can be about,
We used to rent. So this form of doing church, renting spaces, is not new to me. Courtney knows we've been doing this for years and at other churches, and we used to rent a concert hall. And at the time, I was the worship pastor, or that was at least one of my roles. And I remember we used their microphones, so I remember almost every Sunday morning when I would go up to the microphone. It almost made me want to vomit because I smelled a mixture of alcohol, cigarette smoke, and a lot of other things.
Right.
Let's put it like
Yes.
that.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, let's go worship God now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. No, it's fun. Actually, we won't talk about portable church much, but I spend a lot of time on that too, right? I think there's something really dynamic about portable church because there's some tenacity to it. Like there's some grit to it. When you have a big, beautiful building and you walk in, I mean, it's nice, no doubt, right? It's nice, but I don't know. There's something about Christianity being easy that just doesn't, I don't know, sit well. And so, like this morning, Brad, we weren't excited that you guys were locked out. But when we got here, I was like, that's perfect. Like, what a great day, Like, it's going to be awesome. So that's cool. All right. All right, opposite question then. What part of working at the church, that first experience, what part of it was just kind of challenging or just like you had to learn how to do it well?
Yeah, I would say for sure it is balancing just the sheer number of things that need to get done, especially in a younger church. Some of the larger churches have that privilege of having a large staff, but especially in those early days, we were kind of hacking it in a way. And I only mean that in that we had a lot of responsibility on our plate and just a few of us to do the work of ministry. And so it was a lot of long days, long weekends, and a lot of hard work, which I was privileged to be able to do. But probably the most challenging is keeping your sights on what's most important. We as a church body, we are an organization. You could kind of think of it like sometimes it feels a bit businessy in how it operates. And we want to accomplish things, and we have goals, and we have mission statements and so forth. But one of the most challenging things and important lessons for me over time was to remember that we are a church, and I would say the most important thing for us to remember as pastors is that we are here to serve people. And when it comes to prioritizing your time as a pastor, I never want to prioritize the strategies of ministry or the procedures of ministry over simply ministering to people.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things that stuck with me, but I would also even just sit here and say to you as the people of Gulf Community Church that I'm so excited, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, to get to know you, and not to just say hello, but to really get to know you and to get to know your families. And I want to hear from you, and I want to minister to you. I want to go to your kids' baseball games, and I want to have you over for dinner, and you know what I mean, just the things of daily life. I want to be there for you and support you and pray for you and really know you for our lives to get connected. And I know Courtney would say exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. I mean, that element of it, Josh, because, in fact, Joe Badessa walked in earlier and was talking to Joe at the door, but we had a quick conversation almost on that and how the church is an organism. But we've also never seen an organism that was effective without great organization. Like, our bodies are organisms, but without all the systems, our body would just fall apart, right? So, but in churches, so often especially the bigger a church gets, right, it requires more systems and things like that for management. But your heart to see the systems and the organization as a means to people. So we lead the church not to run the system. We run the system so we can best lead people, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about my background, but systems is a major part of my career. And I think one of the reasons that lesson stood out to me is because that's where I tend to go. I tend to just stick with systems and assume they'll get us to the right place. But there's a people part of it too, and balancing those two is extremely important as a pastor.
Well, let's talk about that. So how long were you at that church, that first job as an associate pastor?
Yeah, so I was there as an assistant pastor for 6 years, and after some time, Courtney and I believed that the Lord was leading us to move to Georgia. And so that's what we did. And when we moved to Georgia, the idea was I would take a job outside of the church for just a little while so we could pay the bills and figure out what the next ministry opportunity would be. And I figured that would be a process that would last a couple of months. And here we are, 8 years later. There's been a few things going on during those 8 years. The first, I would say, is that God put his hand of favor on my career that I accidentally started at that time. So I had taken a job as a support agent at a tech company. So I was answering questions about how do you press this button sort of thing. And this was at a startup tech company, and it just grew from there. Not only the company, but my career. I was quickly put into a position of building out a customer service team. And over the next few years, we built a team of 16 people, some of whom were managers that were all rolling up under me. And, talk about systems. Especially in the tech world, it's like a pressure cooker. If you can't figure out how to manage, how to lead, and how to grow a team, you're going to be out tomorrow. Because we have investors upon investors that need us to make growth happen fast. And so a lot of leadership growth in me took place there, and a lot of learning about systems and getting to know what it's like to work in the corporate world, and to get to know people who are also working in that world was huge. So that's one thing that's been going on over the last 8 years. Another thing has been I've been on staff part-time as the worship pastor at a church near where we live. And that's been the majority of the 8 years has been there. And then the third thing that's been going on is that Courtney and I have just been continuing to pray and having open hearts and minds about when that next ministry opportunity might present itself. you had a good talk of that the Gulf watched as the message maybe a month or two ago. There was that series on Holy Ghost stories,
Holy
right?
Ghost stories,
And I remember one of the messages you talked about walking in step with the Spirit. And this is a principle we've been trying to apply in our lives for years, and it's such a perfect example of where we've attempted to do that. I know I had a desire for these 8 years to do a thing, and specifically to go back into full-time pastoring. But as we pressed in prayer, and as we read Scripture, and we talked to those wise counsel, people with wise counsel around us, and talked to each other, we just knew that the Lord is not moving us to do this right now. And we don't understand why, and we don't understand what His timing is. And, some of that can get mysterious. You want one thing to happen, and it's not the right time, and you just don't get it. But it's important to us that we stay in step with the Holy Spirit, and we believe that in order for us, that meant we're not going to push this right now. We're not going to push our agenda, as mysterious and maybe confusing as it may look. We're going to go with the Spirit's leading, what we believe to be that leading. And so we continued to pray, but we didn't push it. We just tried to blossom where we were planted at the time. And so that's been happening for 8 years, and now there's really no other story to it except that we believe in prayer. God started putting a new stirring in our hearts, and we believe through prayer, through reading Scripture, through talking together, through circumstances, that God was now kind of making it clear to us that there's a change, and it's now time. The answer before was not yet for us to return. Now the answer was it's time to return to full-time pastoring. And so we started pursuing that, and thank God it ended with the Gulf.
It's crazy to think, like, as pastors, we always, we teach this all the time and whatever. It's so much easier to say something than to live it, right? But, we always say God's timing is always slow, but always perfect until it's yours in the middle of it. And you're like, I prayed about this yesterday, so by Thursday, this will certainly work itself out. So 8 years, that's a long time. I mean, it's not Moses in Midian for 40, but it's a John, right? So, like, how did you feel like during the 8 years? Like, I mean, how did that, was there a moment where you just thought, all right, well, this isn't going to happen? Or were you frustrated? Like, I mean, how did that feel?
Yeah, this is such a good point, because I learned a lot during this time, and I think it can be an encouragement to anyone who's going through a season like that, where you expected something different at this period of your life, and you don't really understand it, but you're trying to do the best you can in the moment. So now we have this luxury of hindsight, looking back over the 8 years, and we have some things we can point to where we would say, wow, like, I didn't realize it at the time, but God was really up to something in us. Yeah. And quite honestly, the biggest stuff was what He was doing in us. I used to have this thing in my mind and in my heart that God was going to call me to do something big. And in my mind, that was like visibly something big, or numerically leading something huge. But one of the greatest lessons over these last 8 years has been, He is up to something big, but it's what He's doing in me. Mm-hmm. That a lot of times that's what He's up to in the world is not grand schemes, but the miracle of what He's doing in your heart and what He's doing in my heart. And I had some growth to do. Courtney had some growth to do. We had some growth to do together. And we came to, I think, over time, see that, and we came to submit to His timing and His lead over that time. And there's other things we can point to that we couldn't have seen. and it's so easy in hindsight, but our kids were really little, and they had certain needs at the time that probably wouldn't have been able to be addressed if we had been in a different position. COVID happened during that time. I mean, we could point to so many things, and I come now just thankful for God's wisdom, knowing what the right things were at the right time, even when I couldn't see them.
So when you first, I know your first interactions with the directors and the search team and all that was just spectacular. I know that. So when you came for a site visit, what did you first think when you visited Naples? Like, what did you guys think for the very first time when you showed up? Like, how did it feel?
It's warm here.
Yeah. And my very first visit was July. And people said, "Oh, you acclimate." I'm like a frog in boiling water. Like, that sounds amazing. But yeah.
And by the way, I'm from Plymouth, Massachusetts, and we also lived there together for 6 years when we were married, and I was serving there as a pastor. So I like to say ocean water is in my blood, and I've missed it for sure. Did not come here for the ocean, but thankful to God that it's a nice side benefit.
For sure.
But beyond the superficial things like the temperature, so when we got here, I'd say one of the most powerful. There were a couple of moments that really stood out to me. One was hearing from Mike Atkins here so Mike and Sherry were our hosts for the weekend, and we'll forever be thankful for how they treated us and showed us around for the weekend. But Mike had said something, because you probably all know that Mike does his homework and Sherry does her homework, and they talked about how they've spent a lot of time looking into other churches in Naples, and he threw out some statistic about there's 101 churches in Naples, and not one is attempting to do what the Gulf is attempting to do. And that hit me. Mm-hmm. And over time, I've now learned, we've kind of fleshed that out about what that means, and it hit me about the opportunity. Then we had a session driving around with a real estate agent for an afternoon who happens to know not only real estate, but just the spiritual climate. And he was explaining to us how things are changing in Naples, and there are a lot of families moving to Naples, people moving to Naples and it's a cultural shift in our world with working from home. People are able to move to Naples when they haven't been able to before. So there's a lot of population increase, and coupled all those things together, my heart was, and just what the Lord was doing in my heart and in Courtney's heart, we just were struck by the spiritual opportunity in Naples. I believe in our world in general right now, I've never seen anything like it. There's something that Jesus said was that the fields are white unto harvest, white for harvest. And in other words, the world is ready for the message of Jesus. And experientially, I've never seen anything like this like I now see in our culture, that the fields really are white for harvest right now. And more than ever before, culturally, our country, at least, is shifting away from traditional church. Yes, I mean, you talked about it earlier today. But I think folks are more hungry than ever before to hear the real love and message of Jesus. So I think our culture is ready, and I specifically believe Naples, the people of Naples, are eager and hungry to hear the good news that is Jesus. And they're eager to see real love, not something fake that maybe they've experienced in the past, but real love from Jesus followers. And that's what keeps me up at night in a good way, thinking about the Gulf, and really ultimately is what brought us here.
Yeah. You mentioned this earlier, and I love how you stated it, that your desire to minister, pastor to people, to engage with people. So obviously that's a huge part of your heart. It's how you want to lead this church, right? Is there anything else around how you hope to lead here, knowing that you're not going to get it right every time, but you're going to show grace to everybody as they show grace to you, right? But when you think about yourself as a leader, what do you hope will be true of you?
Yeah, and that's a great point about, as with every leader in every organization, and we should probably call it out, especially in the church. Sometimes we can put church leaders up on some pedestal, and then they end up disappointing us.
So many
right?
expectations, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so the first thing is, you're right. I mean, in all seriousness, my first promise to you is that from time to time, I will mess up. I will get it wrong. And I ask first for your grace and your kindness and understanding in those times. But I also promise to you that when I do, I'm ready to hear from you. I'm ready to hear your feedback. I want to hear your wisdom, and I'll be the first to admit when I maybe have made a misstep. But I want to walk together and do this walk of Christian life together as a group. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about and how I hope I'll lead is modeling what it means to be a genuine follower of Jesus. I want to just declare right from the get-go that one of the elements of us as Gulf Community Church is that we will be people who really do believe the things we say we believe on Sunday morning, that we're not just giving lip service to these beliefs, but they really will affect how we walk out our lives from Monday through Saturday. And when we're behind closed doors, the kind of leader I want to be is one where, hey, that's the same person as I saw on that platform on Sunday morning. I was privileged to serve with that senior pastor that I mentioned before back in Massachusetts, and I spent 8 years with the guy. You know what it's like to spend years with someone who has a visible presence, public presence, and this guy certainly had a public presence, but I got to see the behind-the-scenes version, And what scares me is that I think a lot of times they're two different people. And I was privileged, though, to serve with a guy who I could testify, and I said this in front of the church on my very last day. It's one of the greatest privileges is that I get to stand here and say, I want you all to know, the guy that you've seen every week on Sunday mornings on the stage is the same guy that I've seen for 8 years behind closed doors. When it's just him and me, and we're talking about a tough situation with a person, he's not gossiping about them. He's not slandering anyone. He's actually talking to me about how do we serve this person in a way that will help them move forward in their faith journey. That's the kind of leader I want to be. Yeah. And I just declare that's what we're going to be as a church. It's not just for pastors, it's for each person in this room. That the person that we are on a Sunday morning is going to be the same person that is behind closed doors with our spouse, with our friend, with our neighbor, our colleague, our cube mate at work, etc. We're going to be genuinely authentically Jesus followers.
Josh, I love every bit of that. That is so, it feels so good to hear. All right, so we're out of time. I could ask you 100 more questions, but we don't have enough time. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds before we end. And if you have kids in preschool Wamba, the Holy Spirit leaves Wamba land after an hour. So we don't want to run too long. So if you, 30 seconds, what's the one, what is your hope? If you could say one more thing to this, it's your first opportunity, right? You're with these guys. So, if you could tell them one thing, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I'm new here, obviously, but I've spent many hours now listening to quite a few folks, and leadership transitions are never easy for anybody. And although I haven't been around, I want to just say to those who have been here and consistently supporting in so many ways the ministry of the Gulf, I want to just say thank you. Maybe you haven't heard someone say that to you during this season, and I just want to say thank you. And I think what you've been part of setting up is a foundation that will be really a springboard for, Lord willing, an amazing ministry going into the future. I believe with all my heart Naples will never be the same because of what God is doing in the Gulf and will do in the Gulf in the future. I'm so excited to be part of it. I can't wait to get to know you some more, and we're really looking forward to what the Lord has in store.
That's awesome. Hey, will you just one more time tell Josh how grateful we are to have him here?